Welcome back to another edition of Ask America Anything. Thank you for joining us today. I don't have any nice Indian snacks. I have a...
Nor have I made any chai. Fell down on the job as wrapping a Christmas gift for Rowan's teacher and forgot to make chai.
I got Pop-Tarts, you know, those healthy bastions of totally homemade goodness. All right. So from Flying Tank, we got the question, Ford, any thoughts on Alabama voting in a pro-choice Democrat senator? And then Cricket Our Way said, I know this is addressed to Ford, but it's like Gujarat voting in a pro-love jihad Congress candidate to power. That's a pretty good analogy, I would think. Okay, so first of all, never really been a fan of Moore. He was the Alabama Supreme Court judge when you remember that whole thing about the Ten Commandments. Yes.
All this is the extent of Melissa's knowledge. There was a whole bunch of hoopla in Alabama about a statue of the Ten Commandments. That's all.
And look, I mean, as many of you have been able to tell, I've definitely gone much more conservative after going to India in terms of economics and in terms of culture, I guess you'd say. And so this is one of those things that hasn't changed for me. I was frustrated then when we were in a church in Alabama and they were going to go like march down to not march, but they were going to go and like pitch camp and be like, oh, we support our Roy Moore. Like, demagoguery is what it is. It's trying to pit people against each other. It's trying to use religion as a means of, you know, in India, you would call this communalism, right? Or vote bank politics. You know, it's that kind of thing where you're trying to stir the pot up to get things going. And this is, again, the problem with the Front, I think, is like it ends up being demagoguery at a certain point because I'm just spouting off, not thinking through what I'm saying. And I just think it's dangerous. I think we're in a world now where we need less of that and we need more reasoned debate so that we're not just split along ideological lines and just repeating stuff. And Flying Tank, you even mentioned that otherwise, like we end up parroting whatever our echo chamber is. And we kind of run to these echo chambers because let's be honest, it's so mean out in the mainstream. It's just like Arnab Goswami, like he's doing the exact same thing that's happening over here in news. It's just nonstop. Like, let me finish. People talking over each other.
Have you written a letter to Mr. Rajapakse? Have you written a please liar? Or Mr. Swami, there are 2 more guests in the Chennai studio. Can I go?
Pretty much we need to take the debate format and then move that now into anytime there's a person being interviewed on a news channel.
Right.
Okay.
You have your 2 minutes.
Ding. Yep.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. And you can't be
You can't interrupt
interrupted, and you can't go over.
But yeah, not a fan of Moore, and I think the Republicans earned this one. They really, I mean, they just kind of dug their own grave for Alabama to go that way. I mean, that says something. Now, that being said, my grandfather was a press secretary for a Democratic senator to Washington for, and Southern Democrats, again, are a little more conservative morally, I guess you could say, but socially and fiscally, not so much. So, you know, that was back in the 60s, and that was an Alabama senator for years. I want to say 18 or 20 years he was senator for Alabama up in Washington, and Democrat. So, you know, there's a lot of, I would say, unfair portrayals. You know, not everyone in Alabama is the KKK. In fact, 99.999% of the people in Alabama are not KKK. So, fact.
What's that a reference to?
Does anybody? Fact. That's a good video. We need some more of that.
Hey, and good job. Multiple people got Mark Wiens.
Oh, that's right.
That was impressive.
Right off the bat. That was
Good job.
Oh, speaking of which.
Oh, wait, that's another India connection. That's not... I don't know that Mark would ever actually make that face for a Pop-Tart.
No, I don't think he would.
Would that foodie eat it? We can come up with a whole new show.
For Tom
Would the foodie eat it?
Tom Colicchio, everything would be
Like,
needs more salt.
Give him a Pop-Tart. You'd be like, oh, it's not seasoned.
We got a fun little challenge coming up. I don't know what video this will go in, but from Top Chef, they had tarantulas the other day they cooked in the Last Chance Kitchen. That was amazing. I was like, order me one right now.
My stomach turns.
So
every time I think about this, my palms are getting sweaty. I honestly don't think I can film this. I think I will literally throw up.
Tarantula eating in the beginning of January. And, you know, I'm a big fan of tarantulas, so, I mean, yeah.
I'm having, like, pre-traumatic stress syndrome.
So SR the Hull asks, Ford By, what's your opinion about Area 51? Oh, now this is fun. In 7th grade, I was obsessed with Area 51, 7th and 8th grade. Me and my buddy, Clyde Snodgrass, we went to this little private school, and we had study hall together, and me and him were obsessed about this. And we had those TI graphic calculators, and we actually made a map of where Area 51 was in Nevada.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, we were obsessed with it. And then later on, I found out my uncle used to work there. But he's sworn to secrecy, and he'll make those jokes like, yeah, I could tell you.
But then I'd have to kill you.
But then I'd have to kill you. So, yeah, I was obsessed with Area 51. I feel like most UFOs are, I'm not saying all of them, but most UFOs are probably have something to do with some of the testing that went on there. I read about stuff like there's the SR-71 Blackbird, but then there was this thing that would, no, it wasn't the Blackbird. It was one that was like the Blackbird, shaped like that, but then they had a piggyback that would rest on top of it, this other that could actually take off from the back of this plane, and that plane supposedly could go like Mach, I don't remember, it was ridiculous, like Mach 12 or something like that, I don't know, but anyways, like that was, I read a lot about that stuff. I was kind of into that conspiracy theory.
We tried to see the Marfa lights. His parents lived in West Texas, and the next town over from their town was a place called Marfa. And Marfa had a whole, like, UFO alien little museum that this person had made because there were supposed to be these, like, alien lights called the Marfa lights. And so they had this whole viewing area built. So we tried one time to go out there to see the Marfa lights.
Amityville Horror House, I know nothing about it. I did watch, I watched The Conjuring 2, which was the one in Britain, I think. But I never saw the original movie.
We went to college. We went to college 30 minutes from where they filmed, what was that movie? Bad Mountain People.
And what does that have to do with Deliverance?
Deliverance!
What does that have to do with the Amityville Horror?
I don't know. The Deliverance House.
Gross?
I've never seen any of them. Really know nothing about either of them other than they filmed The Deliverance House was 30 minutes from our college.
Amityville Horror. Okay, so Amityville Horror was a real thing that happened in Amityville, New York.
Deliverance is a real movie that was made.
Squeal like pig boy. I've still never seen either one of these movies.
This is not my genre.
Well, Deliverance is not the same genre as Amityville Horror. But, all right. Have you ever seen a ghost in real, or have you ever been haunted? Yeah, I've had experiences that I can't really categorize whether or not it's a ghost or it's just, like most of them being a kid, just lights coming on. You're like, there's nobody down here or downstairs. Why did that light come on? Thinking I saw a shadow, those kind of things.
Thankfully, I have no ghost stories.
Now, I will say there was one time, Melissa was out of town, and I was watching The Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere. And that movie, for whatever reason, freaked me out that night. And so I was going to sleep, and I'd set my alarm for 6 a.m. And then it hit 12 a.m., and my alarm went off. And I checked the alarm, and it said 6 a.m., but the alarm was going off. So I turned the alarm off, and it wouldn't stop beeping. And for some reason, just after seeing the Mothman Prophecy, that freaked me out. I ripped the thing out the wall and threw it across the room. Because that exact same thing happens in the movie. He's talking on the phone with the ghost or whatever, and he pulls the phone cord out the wall, and it still works. So, like, when I pressed the off, I mean, first of all, it wasn't on the right time, and then it was off, and so, yeah, that wigged me out. So that was the my Ghost in the Machine story. What about you? I am curious, is anybody, India or America, have you had any ghost stories?
Any jinns?
Curious to know. Jinns. There you go. How has India changed you from Akash Mahir? Has your food habits changed? Saw your Deshmek samosa. Apart from eating habit, has it able to change your views on life or approach to people, etc.?
Moving outside of your home culture for 5 years and really trying to learn about that culture, it really does change you, because when you come back to your home culture, you're not the same person. You're able to really see sometimes what is culture that you didn't realize when you were living in the midst of it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a huge difference, I think.
Culture is almost like the water you swim in, you know, that you don't even realize until you get out of it, and you're like, oh wow, that's a different water than that water. Everything is a little bit different, and you know, it's impossible for humans to live without culture, without shared culture. And so, but once you're like she said, once you're out of it for 5 years or any period of time, realizing that, oh, other people have different ways of doing home, and I actually kind of like this thing, and I actually kind of like this thing. And so when you come back, you're like, well, I kind of like that way better, but then nobody's doing it that way. So
yeah, so I do like that. Like, I feel like it's opened me up to be like, you know, I like doing it this way, and I maybe wouldn't have thought about doing something that way before living overseas.
So I think some specific things with India, like just, I mean, simple things like drinking water that doesn't have to be cold. Like in America, I'm always drinking cold water, and after going to India, it's just like, why would I ever do that? And I think in Europe, there's similar kind of thinking, like you just drink room temperature water, you know? But in America, it always has to be like freezing cold, you know?
With
it's just
ice.
like the Arctic, you know?
And gigantic size.
Yeah, and so, you know, the amount of consumption, the amount of dependence on like air conditioning, all these kind of things, you realize, oh, you don't actually need this to be a human being. Why are we like being so
I appreciate
rigid?
it.
Yeah.
Greatly.
But it does make you kind of examine like some of the excesses of the consumption, or the, you know, just the habits, the trends. Approach to people, I think, yeah, definitely India taught me to be more assertive, but you know, even that doesn't really translate back here for me. Like it's just different, and I feel like I imagine Indian Americans go through this when they first come over. Just like certain things Indians are very forward about, and it's not impolite, and then Americans appear to be the most impolite people on the planet. You know, like, yeah, we're just yeah, dude, we just wear hard our sleeves, yo. But then there's certain things we're like, no, we can't talk about that. Like, so it's kind of weird. It's kind of hard to understand like American culture, because it seems like it's very free and open, but then there's certain things like, you know, if you launch into a conversation like, so what do you do? How much money do you make? Like, American would be
that's right.
what?
Yeah.
What'd you say to me? Like, so
asking
it's just
asking personal details
right.
about finances.
So there's just, it's confusing. I mean, I think every culture is confusing to some degree to an outsider. You know, that makes sense when you live in it for a long time, but when you've gone away, you're just like, oh, I don't know how to reacclimate here. So, yeah.
And I think it's also hard. You've just had experiences that your family back here just cannot understand, and it really does leave this kind of hole in relationships. I find that I feel like most people back here just don't get me.
Right. So it is just kind of weird. You end up being this third cultural
right.
person,
Which is what I remember. I mean, I grew up, or I trained as a teacher in college, and I remember doing these trainings, you know, for third culture kids. These, you know, you've got military, you've got business, all these diplomats, like all of these kids, they call them third culture kids. Like, okay, well, and we're now like a third culture person. And, you know, any of you who have lived away from your home country for a long period of time, you're now a third culture person. Like, you just, it's this different experience. It's beautiful and tough.
Right. But I think it's one thing we're going to have to figure out how to work through, because it's going to be more and more the experiences you are having as an Indian living in America or in Australia or Canada, the experiences we're having as being just, I don't know, feeling kind of in between. Like, I feel like more and more people are going to have these experiences, and it's been happening for millennia. You know, somebody, refugees living in another place and having to reform their culture. You know, this has been happening for a long time. Lots of, you know, our buddy Kunal, like, you know, he's actually not Bengali in culture or heritage, but he speaks Bengali. He grew up in, right. You know, so I mean, I don't want to say that word.
He's Rajput.
Right, he's Rajput, but I mean, he's Bengali in terms of how he's been raised.
His family's been there for so long. Multiple generations, how he's been raised, yeah.
So yeah, interesting challenges, and I think, you know, our time in India kind of put the light bulb on for us for that. Like, that's just stuff that we didn't really process, you know, while we were living here. What are your thoughts? This is from Singh Shashi. What are your thoughts on the reports of U.S. supplied weapons in the hands of ISIS? The U.S. has been supplying terrorists for years, you know, and this is part of my problem with so much what the CIA, FBI, and the people in the closed doors, they're making decisions for all of us, getting us into conflicts that may or may not even be necessary. And I think more often than not, we create problems that we're trying to solve 20 years later. We armed bin Laden, like against the Russians. So, and then, 20 years later, he's attacking us. 30 years later, he's attacking us. So I feel like we do these little puppet ruler things and pit people against each other. It's just all this espionage and double speak, and I just don't think it's a good way of running foreign policy. Yeah, I've definitely not been a fan of the way we've run our war machine. This neocon is what they call it, the neocon way of policing the world. Like, it's running like an empire, not like sovereign nation, that's acknowledging the sovereignty of other nations. Why does the U.S. government forget that the planners of 9/11 were people it once armed and trained? Yes, exactly. That's a great question. And they keep doing this stuff. I mean, ISIS wouldn't have existed, most likely, if we had kept our business out of Syria and kept our business out of Iraq. Now, that's very controversial to say because Syria used chemical weapons against its own people. People use human rights as it's always just like, this is another case of the Jews being massacred in Germany. We've got to go in and interact now. Not every case is like that. Some of these are very different. It's odd to me that Democrats and conservatives have joined hands across the aisle on these issues. Like, all of a sudden Democrats love war, which is just weird to me. Although they loved war in Vietnam, let's not forget that. Yeah, our constant war state is it's destabilizing other areas, and it's not well thought out. I think I'm not a pacifist. I don't think that we're ever going to truly have a fully peaceful world, but I think 99% of the options should be tried first, unless for sure it's Hitler. I don't support the regime change policy of U.S. government because it always backfires. And again, this is the same problem that I have with the current economic system, with central banking, all these things. I know some of you will hear it and just think that I'm an alt-right nut job or a libertarian idiot, but it's the same problem that's uniting all these things. It's people acting like they are a god, like that they have this bird's eye view of the whole world. And if I move this chess piece here, this isn't a game of Risk. We're talking about 7 billion people here. And we're talking about so many tiny, just micro calibrations. You make one wrong move with one chess piece of a, puppet ruler, and you don't know. I mean, you just don't know. Read The Ugly American. That's the best thing I can say. Read The Ugly American. That book is one of the best books about foreign policy, about Americans' interventionism, and how we haven't listened to it for the last 40 years. It's been there. You think after Vietnam, we would have learned some lessons about that stuff, but we don't. We just keep repeating the same lessons. Read The Ugly American, not like pro-Saddam, but there's times when you take out a Saddam, and then what happens? Oh, you take out the Leviathan. What happens? A hydra of 18 other things form. Like, what's worse, Saddam or ISIS? I don't know. But those are the questions you have to ask before you do it. And Ugly American kind of dives into that sort of stuff. Also, what are your thoughts, if any, on Tulsi Gabbard? Well, she surfs. I mean, yeah, you got a picture of her surfing there. I actually don't know. I read a little bit about her rise at the beginning. I'm sorry, I don't really know much to say. I remember reading something and being struck by, I think she's the Democrat, right? Much rather have Tulsi Gabbard than Hillary. First Hindu member of the United States Congress.
Oh, from Hawaii?
Yep. American Samoan descent, European descent of practicing Hinduism.
That's an interesting.
So she's not.
That is a.
Oh, here's what I want to ask. I want to ask the Indian audience, what do you think of a non-Indian being a Hindu? Let's see.
Good question for the audience.
Okay, but I think she's has some interesting ideas and is breaking through the party line to some degree. I just have little faith in politicians in general, just because I think there's always some other bottom line that they're not. They have, as Hillary Clinton put it, a public policy and a private policy, and I think it's the private policy that bothers me more than their public policies. So yeah, some of the rest of these questions we'll answer India Connection on Wednesday. And anything else?
No. There is a saying.
What's that?
That I'm going to coin right now.
All right.
You should never turn your back on the ocean or your chai. So growing up as a kid, I always learned never turn your back on the ocean. Because Because the waves,
Wave,
right?
yeah.
The waves will come and knock you down. So you just never turn your back on the ocean because it'll get you. It'll knock you down. You should also never turn your back on your chai because that is one thing you do not want your chai to boil over. It's a huge mess. So there you go. There's my little adage and words of wisdom for you.
Where did that come from?
No, I was last week I was making my chai and I needed to go do something else, and then you have to stop there and you have to think, in the amount of time it's going to take me to do that, is my chai going to boil over? And I decided not to walk away from my chai. You should never walk away from your chai. It'll boil over and make a huge mess.
That's fascinating. All right.
There you go.
Well, there you go. Never turn your back on the ocean.
Or your chai.
And until next time, keep it creative, keep it cross-cultural, and keep it constructive, YouTubers.
Thanks, folks. Changed it up. Wasn't thank you very much.
All right.